Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, Andy, thank you guys so much. As always. Well, I know that we're running out on time because I know that everybody wants to also see the view. So I'm going to ask Yobie to come directly with his speakers, and please, a round of applause for them. And if you can't hear in the back, please just speak up a little bit louder. We're going to video this and send it out to you guys as well, so the audio is separated from what you hear right now. But please, Yobie Benjamin, thank you.
Sorry. I'm used to talking loud, but the last few nights have been taxing on my voice. Thank you very much for Marcus and everybody in Swedish Lunch. I hope you can hear me at the back. I'll do a quick introduction of myself before I bring in on our panel. My name is Yobie Benjamin. I'm currently the CTO of a company called ClickSwitch. Very simple concept. You hate your bank, click here, we move you to another bank. It's that simple. We have, very proud to say that our company has only been a year and a half old and we're profitable. Definitely cash flow positive. On the other side, I'm also an investor, and I've written software for PSD2, which is related to the Payment Services Directive in the EU, and I'm an investor. So one of the companies I'm actively invested in is a company called Astro Digital. Astro Digital is a satellite company. We do small satellites, 400 kilometers up. And I could not be more privileged than to actually introduce a real astronaut. Christer Fuglesang, sorry, Christer, is the first Swedish astronaut. He's flown on 3 missions, 3 spacewalks, and I couldn't be more privileged. If you don't, I'll call the others and we'll introduce him. The other thing that I used to do, which is another weird thing, is I used to work in what's called 3-letter agencies in the United States. And I'm very fortunate to introduce Oren. Where is Oren? Oren Falkowitz, who likewise used to work in a 3-letter agency, or probably still does, you know, except he'd have to kill you if he told you anything, you know. And finally, Sam Cassatt. Sam, where are you? And Sam is an expert on identity. And what I'm going to do right now is allow all 3 of them to do a quick introduction of themselves, and then we'll go and switch into asking them some questions.
Well, my name, as you said, Christer Fuglesang, and try to speak loud so everyone can hear them. And background is actually a physicist, worked at CERN on the other side of this country for some years, and then got the opportunity to become an astronaut for the European Space Agency and flown twice in space. Right now, since 4 years, I'm mainly working at the Kit H. Institute of Technology, where I teach and do science and research and do some directorate things, all with space.
Oh, cool. I'm Oren Falkowitz. I'm the founder and CEO of Area 1 Security, and as Yobie said, I worked at the National Security Agency for about 7 years.
Hi, I'm Sam Cassatt. My background is in neuroscience, computer science. I used to also consult for 3-letter agencies sometimes.
IBM is also a 3-letter company. You know, that's why that's so interesting.
That was not one of them.
That's true as well. You know, I was CTO of an identity company, and now I'm Chief Strategy Officer of a company called Consensus, which is a blockchain venture studio. We build blockchain companies, and we help governments and large businesses understand how to capitalize on the new internet revolution that's happening, the new blockchain revolution, how they can map their business processes onto this. And identity is a crucial component of that.
So let me start off with some questions. We were relegated to talking about the past, but we're going to steal a little bit of the future as we talk about this. So just to stick to the theme, I want to ask, generally things about space. A lot of people don't really understand space and why people actually have to go to space. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the things that you've learned out of the past on space and what space has actually contributed to humanity and us right now.
It's very easy to argue, I mean, all the things why we are utilizing space. I mean, all the applications we have there. I mean, we communicate via space, we navigate these days via space satellites, we use the information from space also just daily weather forecasts to project for hurricanes, and a lot of what we've learned about the climate problems are really from data from space. What people normally have more argue about is why should we send humans to space? And it really originated more from a geopolitical reason. And it was a statement from countries to say, we are the best. And the race to go into the moon was really that the United States felt they had to show themselves and the world that they were better than the Soviet Union. And one of the most common questions I get is, why haven't we been back to the moon yet? And really, because the reason to go to the moon and it was done was to show politically we are best, and spent a lot of efforts to that. Well, we are now actually on our way back to the moon. And the reason going to space with humans is partly for research, partly because I think that's the future, going to the future, for humanity, that we learn to live in other places than just here. And I look forward to 50 years from now, we don't have the World Economic Forum, we have the Interplanetary Economic Forum.
Yeah, we like to hear that. I'm going to segue a little bit to Oren over here. Oren, you know, I think that the scope of security, not just cybersecurity, has changed dramatically. And Oren and I were talking about a set of common knowledge and common experience we have. Could you comment a little bit on the state of security, not only from a cybersecurity, political security, you know, policy, etc., what it has been in the past, and where you think this is headed into the future, given that this is the age where nation states are actually affecting other nation states in the way they conduct, let's say, their elections.
Sure. Well, you know, in the past, issues of security have really been secret, right? And they've been done in dark between governments or large criminal organizations.
Can you speak up a little bit, Oren? Our friends in the back.
Sure. So the difference today is that we're all more aware of the challenges that we face, particularly in cyberspace. Everyone in this room has been the victim of cybercrime, whether they're having their identity stolen or their credit card stolen, and it's probably happened multiple times. Myself, it's happened over a dozen times through breaches at companies like Target and the large credit card companies, Yahoo, lost over 1 billion people's information in the last year. And I think the important thing is that people today are feeling really hopeless about the security landscape. It almost seems impossible to go head-to-head against a country like the United States or Russia or China or the Mossad or some very sophisticated criminal organizations. But I think if you look at space as an example, humankind has accomplished so much more in our lifetime. We've sent people to the moon with less computing power than is in this phone, right. Yet we have this feeling that we can't stop losers like myself from hacking computers, and so that's not a premise that we think about. And I think if you look towards the past, you can see the opportunity and the imagination to succeed is really to our advantage.
Okay, this is a perfect segue for you now, my friend. One of the things we've agreed on, we spoke prior to this, is one of the biggest failures in security is username password, because it may be a secret, but it's a shared secret that you can break, you can find, and almost all of you use username passwords. Could you comment a little bit on the history of username passwords and where we could get to in the future?
Sure. It's a pleasure to have a little bit of opportunity for the future as well. So I work for a blockchain company, so it's hard not to talk a little bit about it. So username and password is an artifact of the beginnings of the internet, the architecture of the beginnings of the internet. it's something you know, or it's a shared secret. People who think about security and people who think about identity on the internet often point to something you know, something you have, and something you are. And I think what blockchain identity will do to us is it will sort of reformulate what we see as the core of our identity, right? When you log into Google servers or when you log into Facebook servers, you're using a username and password, and then they are storing the representation of your identity on their servers. That's also what allows them to monetize all the information about your identity, because they control it. When you click yes in that little checkbox at the bottom, you're signing over the license to that data to them, etc. Right? So in the future, and in blockchain technologies and more advanced authentication and identity technologies, I think we'll move more towards something like something you know plus something you are. So for instance, your phone might record the way that you walk down the street, your gait analysis. It might record your GPS coordinates. It might be something you are, like your thumbprint. It's actually this sort of constellation of associated aspects of your identity that really comprise your identity. And that's a much more powerful way to authenticate. But not only is it a way to authenticate, it's more about that rich data, right? It's more about when I log into something else with Facebook, right? I'm taking that identity with me. And I think what's happening right now is we're re-architecting the paradigm where you will be in control of your identity in blockchain. And when you go from service to service, just like I log into something else with Facebook, I can log into anything with my blockchain identity. And that's going to add much more rich information to our digital lives. If I'm an Uber passenger and I have 5 stars on one service, I can go to another service like Lyft and also have my 5 stars. And I think that adds value to every new economic activity, every new service that you might participate in, and produces network effects.
The interesting thing about that, your comment, is username password is a relic really of DARPA, right? When we first talked about username and passwords, it was a government-led effort.
Yep.
And now a lot of these innovations are being led by private companies. I'd like you to comment on the changes that are happening in the space industry, wherein it used to be governments, it used to be NASA, it used to be the Russian Space Agency, the European Space Agency, and now we are moving towards private industry taking charge of a lot of the innovations in space. Could you comment a little bit on that, and what do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, it's very good, and it's really almost called a game changer. What's going on? That bringing in a lot of private investors and people like Elon Musk and others who kind of invest their own money to build rockets, and not only to send satellites, communication satellites. Has actually for a long time been a way to make private money in space, but the only one. But now developing the means for sending humans to space, and a coming industry will definitely be space tourism. And this, because so many, let's call them smaller countries, companies are developing rockets, it also will drive the costs down a lot with new technologies, which is again a lot led by SpaceX and Elon Musk. So the space environment will look very different from 10 years from now. And I predict this first space hotel will probably be there in 10 years or 15 years.
I think everybody here will buy the first ticket, you know.
Well, I think that government's role in innovation is often misunderstood, right? And the government plays the most important part in innovation by the funding of basic science research, which it's the only sort of leader of, in grants to major universities, MIT, European universities, Harvard, et cetera, that fund PhDs and the new research that allow these companies to get off the ground, and the contracts that SpaceX and others use to actually run their businesses. So I think the fact that companies are now new players in this space doesn't mean that the government has relinquished its role, and that wasn't the way DARPA formed the internet either. That was a consortium of public universities in relation with the Department of Defense. So I think we need to have a more holistic approach and not move away from that thinking.
Could you comment a little bit right now, since you have a little experience in let's just call it the 3-letter agency world, on what is happening right now globally.
Three-letter agencies.
Yeah, I know. They're all 3 letters somehow. Right?
Ether.
You know. And comment a little bit about how society copes now with the rise of nation states taking very, very active roles in interfering with other nation states.
Well, that's something in the past. Countries have been interested in the economics and the political outcomes of their allies and foes for hundreds of years, right? The Romans made codes and spied on people, and this is not a new phenomenon. The tools that are being used are different. Certainly things like the internet didn't exist, but people's interest in one another's diplomatic or political outcomes or military decision making is not new. I think what is new is that we're all more aware of it because information is the currency in the 21st century and beyond. Many companies that I meet with, particularly I was surprised when I left the government that financial services companies now often refer themselves as technology companies. They don't even think of themselves, they don't call them, they say we're a tech company. And so people are taking advantage more of information. They're seeing that things like identity or the rich data that you're speaking about is really what's going to allow them to succeed in the future. And that means that government activities have come more into light, not only because of leaks and disclosures, but because people are more aware and people are more fluid through that. And that creates some opportunities. It creates opportunities for new types of trust and new types of partnerships that I think are very exciting, and we're seeing that in space and in other places. So.
I'm going to, again, steal a little bit from the future as I ask you your next question. Almost all of us here are talking about, okay, identity, we're going to have blockchain, but when is it really coming? Is really my question. And then when does this really come into fruition? When does everybody here give up their username and passwords? Give us a little perspective on that. Where is that? Is it a 5-year window? Is it a 10-year window?
Sure. I think that's a good question. It's actually happening a lot faster than I thought it was going to happen, even though I've been sort of immersed in that world for a long time. It seems to be speeding up. So 2 years ago, I was sitting in innovation officers in their offices, telling them what a blockchain is, and they had no idea. The past year, we've been sitting in CIOs' offices, explaining to them and working with them to understand how to map business processes onto blockchain technology. We're also sitting with governments like Dubai, who have said that by 2020, all of their processes will be on a blockchain. So I think that in sort of first movers, in companies that have the sort of capital and they have the internal expertise to really look at these technologies, fintech and banks are obviously a little bit worried about the disruption that might come from it, so they've been first movers. We've also seen companies like BHP Billiton, for instance, already putting into production systems on blockchain. So I think there's already kind of a first mover group that's happening, and I think it will disseminate more into consumer technology over the next several years.
What is several years? Do you mind me pushing you a little bit on that?
Sure. So I think I'm a product-oriented person, and when I think about the right way to give products to a consumer, I think that they shouldn't need to know really what's going on underneath. I don't need to know that there's some advanced database technology underneath my Facebook app, right? I just need to know that it's Facebook and it makes my life better and I like it. I think that right now what you're seeing are people producing innovative fintech technologies. So in emerging markets, for instance, there are services like Abra, for instance, where it actually feels like a bank, it works like a bank, but it's actually based on blockchain technology underneath, and all you need is a smartphone to use it. So I think what we'll see is that it will disseminate into people's lives by adding new capabilities and new things that they couldn't do before. So it's already happening, and I think it'll accelerate.
All right. I'm going to go and depart from the last format and allow for 3 questions that you can ask any one of us. So anybody here have a question?
Let's make it 4 to get away from the parallel of 3-letter things.
I like that.
Sort of
I like that.
uncomfortable
Let's
for
do
me.
that.
Yeah, okay.
Let's do the 4-question format.
Okay.
All right. Anybody? Oh my God, this is the World Economic Forum group. You can't be the shy group. Come on. There you go.
What's the problem with existing database technology?
You want to take that? You want to
So-
take that?
Sure, I'll take that. So, right now, if you think about the way that we interact with businesses, it's actually all formulated around a database. And you maybe don't realize it, but every time you've ever filled in a piece of paper where there are individual little boxes per letter, the reason you're doing that is because it needs to map into a database that goes inside of a siloed system inside of a company. And they've designed, every meeting that they have, every way that their technologists interact with all that information, every way their business interacts with that information, that's all dictated by the shape of that database technology. So we invent really weird, inefficient ways for databases to talk to each other from inside one business to inside of another business. So for instance, in a bank, you don't have checks in Europe, but in the US, we still literally write on pieces of paper to signify that this bank should take their database and deduct $100 from this one, and this bank should take their database and add $100 to this one. We're using literally a piece of paper to connect those databases. So part of what blockchain technology is it's a way to disintermediate. It's a way to directly connect those databases. It's a way to have business processes that are directly connected to each other and therefore reduce transaction cost.
Question number 2.
Question for Crystal. What's your opinion between colonizing Mars versus building space stations with the debate between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos?
Do both.
That's awesome. That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, if you maybe couldn't hear the question in the back, but the question was the difference between what would I prefer, colonizing Mars or going around the Earth? What I think is the important thing is actually to build up an infrastructure in space. It's not, and that's a question which often is asked, well, do we need to go back to the moon before we go to Mars? Because some are afraid that we go to the moon first, well, get later to Mars. But it's important to not do what was done in the 60s, just go to moon and put the flag there. And to kind of create the infrastructure in space with laboratories or hotels, living spaces around the Earth, bases on the moon, eventually bases on the Mars, and in the future even going to moons around maybe the outer planets. So I prefer rather go a little bit slower and build up infrastructure on the way than just go as soon as possible to Mars.
That's a great answer. Do we have question number 3? Come on. There you go.
I have a question to Oren. If I understand well, your company is mainly focused in phishing attacks. So what I wonder is, once there's a phishing attack to a company, for instance, what are the usual impacts? Like, how deep can it go, or is it just stays at the level where they perhaps steal some of your personal information, or take your credit card details and take some money, or what's the level of the impact of those attacks?
Sure. So virtually 100% of all cyber attacks start with phishing. All the attacks against major companies, against the U.S. elections this year, against individuals, one's financial situations, they all start with users allowing attackers into networks. It's the primary method by which that happens. And by primary, I mean like in 97+% of the cases. And the reason that it is that way is because all of us are curious, right? Many of us in our jobs are required to click on emails, to open attachments, to do things of that nature, or to get pages that look like Google and put your username and password in to try to log in. And the impacts are unlimited, right? Attackers only have one advantage. It's not that they're technical or sophisticated, it's that they're imaginative. And they can look for trade secrets, stealing documents from companies like Boeing or Airbus or EADS. They can look for intelligence information, political motivations, diplomatic motivations. They can steal hundreds of millions of credit cards, as have happened over the last couple of years, or they can steal data and then release it, as has happened this year with the Panama Papers, with the U.S. election, and what's happening in European elections today. So the impacts are really unlimited. And the key, though, that most people fail is to see why would someone attack them. And so if you all thought about wanting to hack and get 100 million credit cards, the first thing you would think about is probably to attack American Express and other major credit cards around the world, but attackers have shown that the companies that store credit card information, like retailers, like hotels and others who maybe haven't invested as much in security products, have the exact same information and they do that. So it is the method and it is the impact that happens. Did that help?
All right, question number 4, our last one. I'm going to have to pick the woman because I saw her hand first. Sorry.
You mentioned Dubai as being a supporter of blockchain. Do you think governments tend to support blockchain technology or more oppose it, especially considering that Bitcoin is not getting favorable, especially in currencies?
Sure. So I think that you're right that sort of original narrative of Bitcoin is something that was worrisome to a lot of people. And I think that a lot of governments around the world and large industry has really abstracted away from Bitcoin, and now blockchain is really is the focus, right? Blockchain is the generalization of the technology that underlies Bitcoin, and I think that's something that governments should be engaged with, and I see a lot of governments engaging with. So, for instance, in the UK, it looks like they want to offer a safe harbor to startup companies and fintech companies that are experimenting with this technology. In the U.S., I know a number of states, for instance, the state of Delaware is looking to put some of their property registries on this technology. But I think it remains to be seen. The game right now is a little bit of sort of wait and see, and also interact as much as possible with these blockchain companies, because right now what's happening is we're creating things that are just not contemplated by existing regulation, right? The fact that a kid in a garage can write a few lines of software that behaves the same as a security, it behaves the same as a stock market, that's not contemplated at all by existing regulation. And there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to innovate in financial technology. There's also a tremendous amount of opportunity to move into emerging markets where where they just don't have that infrastructure, and to give them that infrastructure. So I think governments are well positioned to sort of to try to more deeply understand what's happening, because there's a lot of benefit to be reaped for our entire civilization if they do that. But I think they'll have a key role in that. There's also just one more statement. I think around identity, actually, there are a lot of things that governments could do to support this. There are things like sharing identity infrastructure that's made possible by blockchain, and if government provides the understanding sort of support around that, it could reduce compliance costs in our financial industry. It could reduce a lot of the burden that we place on governments right now, actually, and make our society richer, essentially, if they can embrace that.
And with that, let's give a round of applause to these wonderful panelists. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you.